implementing these different types of AI can get very challenging, especially when working with big institutions. Mary, you have a lot of experience in that. How are institutions grappling with these different types of AI and starting to work them into the systems that fuel them?
Thank you. I agree that AI has been around for a while. We've used things like document processing. Anybody here who's ever taken a photograph of your check and had it end up in your bank account has engaged in using more traditional AI. I think the point here where we talk about the ability for generative AI to use vast quantities of data, essentially gleaned from the internet, billions and billions of parameters of data, and then to be creative, to create novel content and engage users in a natural language way is the big transformation. So when we think about institutions like government or universities or even commercial sector, we're talking about the ability to interact directly with essentially a co-creator of knowledge. Right? So that is a big challenge. I work primarily in the education space as universities, K-12, other learning institutions think about how do we grapple in a market where we have essentially a co-creator of knowledge that is somewhat trustworthy, not entirely trustworthy. And so they're thinking about ways to use it to improve operational efficiencies, to use it to enhance the student learning experience, and to create access to opaque institutional processes. But there's also sort of the side where they're looking about how we rethink how teaching and learning occurs, or how we think constituent engagement occurs in the context of this co-creator of learning.
It's really interesting. Therese, the Banner data reporters, we use AI, generative AI, a lot to help us code because we forget, and the AI does a good job of remembering. You use both types of AI, right? You're doing that in your work as a physician, but you're also using this sort of other, more traditional AI model in terms of your app. Can you tell us a little bit about those two things?
Yes, happy to. So for context, I'm a physician at Johns Hopkins in pediatric emergency medicine and also a startup founder. My company, CuriDX, is creating AI-based lab tests on your phone using smartphone images. So for example, take a picture of your throat and we can predict strep throat. And we're in the early stages where we're taking the R&D and just starting to commercialize it. And so in my clinical role, just speaking to what does this look like when we implement this at a large institution, even though there are forms of AI that can support the clinical decision-making, they're not universally accepted. So, and as you can imagine, healthcare is a regulated space. You cannot cause harm, and you must be safe, and the FDA also regulates safety and efficacy. So even though there are really advanced AI tools, even like what I'm building at CuriDX, to get it adopted into a large health system, you might run in the beginning when you're creating the AI, but then you start crawling when it comes to getting the clinical data and getting through FDA to implement it. And I'll give an example of one smart tool that we have in our electronic health record. I had a 4-month-old come in who had fever and cough and cold symptoms. And she didn't look that sick, so I thought, okay, she could be sick, but we'll keep an eye on things and take action, do additional tests if needed. When I sat at my computer, I got a pop-up that said, alert, she is at risk for sepsis. Now, I was at a crossroads. I could take the advice of this computer-generated suggestion and start doing extra lab tests, extra antibiotics, get more and more invasive, or I could go with my original plan, which is let me watch, observe, and only take action if I see worsening signs. I ended up taking the computer's advice, and I did lab tests, I gave antibiotics, and thank goodness I did, because within an hour, she started getting critically ill. And so what this tells me is even in it's a very rudimentary sepsis tool. It's not even generative AI by any means. There are already signs that technology can support us and help us with decision making when it counts the most. And this is life-saving types of examples.
That's really interesting. In that point, you're the human in the loop, which is sort of the terminology all of us dorks or nerds like to use whenever we talk about computers, right? Eero, how does that work at T-Row, right? How does the human in the loop get between what a generative AI or another AI model is doing and the decisions traders are making, that T-Row is making overall?
Well, it all comes down to what you're hoping to achieve. And I think the value, actually Therese touched on that, it's about augmentation. It's not about substitution or blind automation. So you have their agents that are really experts in what they're doing, right? So same as humans make mistakes, the Gen AI will. So the idea is to combine the most powerful inputs from both. That said, when it comes to generative AI, there are some small challenges, and in particular, I'll probably get too technical here, but unlike AI, where we can sit down and train it, these models are too expensive, enormous. So it's usually a handful of players, the OpenAIs of the world, the AWSs of the world. So there is something to be said about not being able to intervene there. So interestingly, when it comes to Gen AI, you can intervene, frankly, output onwards. So you can have some kind of filter. But again, as I usually say, and I was asked this morning whether they can quote me, the best risk management system and approach is the educated user, hands down. Gen AI, we said, it's creative. So we can either spend eternity to stop making it, to stop it from being creative and be perfect, or we are smart and say, this is useful, this is so useful. Put it next to the human, but let the human, at the end of the day, be the judge of the final decision.
The risk is something to think about a lot, right? There are a lot of risks when unleashing AIs on your institutions, on your students, on your coworkers, right? We have to think about bias, the bias that's created from the data these are trained on. We have to think about hallucination. There's no way anyone here can fix hallucination, right? That's bigger problems for people who are making these sorts of things. We also have to worry about manipulation. The way that these bots talk to us and treat us can change the way how we feel. So a question for the panel, how do we deal with that, right? Like, how do we go home and go back to work and try to unleash this without wreaking havoc on our institutions?
I think there's, both a human in the loop, there's sort of an ethical and mission approach that organizations are going to have to take and individuals, but there's also a technical approach. So I do think that we should understand that the large language models that exist now often reflects bias because they reflect the content that human beings have created, right? So we are biased, therefore they are biased. But there are technical ways to mitigate for that. So at AWS, we have guardrails that help you set parameters so that you can prevent toxic and biased content from becoming outputs of your generative AI capabilities. And I also don't want to under-index on the value of grabbing these models and as an institution and at an organizational level, using your own data to train them for better accuracy, to reduce bias, to do what you want them to do within your context and using your information. So what's freely available to everyone here on your phone is a general large language model. But that is not how enterprise organizations are thinking of using these. They are working with them with other AI capabilities, they're working with them with guardrails, they're working with them with their own data to enhance their efficacy, to provide greater value to their users, and to mitigate for some of those big challenges. So there is a technical response to that.
And I'll add on to that, as a CEO and startup founder and creator of a new AI tool that I believe is going to completely transform how we live and how we are sick and how we are healthy, there is an onus and responsibility for AI creators to be thoughtful of those ethical guardrails up front. So as you point out with the technical, the technical integration of how do you build in the ethics from the beginning. I have this example where, let me ask you, do you ever ask your kids, how was your day? What do they say? Fine. Good, that's it. Even for my kindergartner, that's all I can get out of her. I gave my kids Pi, the Pi app. It's a conversational app, and they talked to Pi for 45 minutes, more than they even talked to me. And for some reason, they then said, can we tell you where we live and what school we go to? And I was like, no. Pi, it's got a human voice. It says, you are minors. We're not allowed to take that information. And I said, thank God. Whoever built that into the app, the technology side of it, had anticipated if we're dealing with minors, we should not be taking personal information such as identifiers and addresses. And so I think that goes to, that speaks to the ethical side and the legal side of those who are building these systems that were integrating those guardrails from the beginning.
Balaji, how does this work in business? You know, I know you work closely with business trying to implement AI. Are there special needs, special guardrails that you need to put in place? Or is business maybe not thinking so much about that and just chasing capital?
You know, so if you look at the news articles about businesses using AI and so on, it's interesting that you will not find too many cases where people have profitably used Gen AI today. Even the big tech platforms are losing money, right? And the cloud providers are doing well, the hardware providers are doing well because that's the infrastructure, right? But the people actually using it, and I talk to a lot of businesses, it is a struggle. It is not easy for them to make AI work to solve problems. They are experimenting, they're playing around with many use cases to see where they can actually get meaningful return on investment, and it is very hard, right? You will hear the success stories, but what you will not hear are the failures, the efforts that people are doing. Now, you know, AI does have a lot of powerful capabilities, right? And the reason I think businesses are experimenting is that they understand that. They understand that, look, in the long run, I can see what some of these capabilities can do. And so it's a journey, right? Now, that said, I think, you know, I would abstract and encourage the audience to understand, you know, what is behind AI that is making it work in these use cases. You know, what I tell students a lot is, please don't think of AI as magic. AI is not magic, right? It's hard work under the scenes that engineered to do certain things. It's very important for all of us, and education is very important, particularly this time, to understand at some level of understanding how it works, right? And I think that will help you get through, you know, start this journey as a business, and to make good calls on where you think the positive use cases could be, and what's, you know, an alley that you don't want to go down.
But we have to make the distinction between Gen AI, right? All these uncertainties around Gen AI, the not making it work, et cetera. Can I say something about biases? Because it's another one of my... So, as you pointed out, what is bias? It's a behavior that something exhibits because that's what it was taught. So, as an example of biases, once upon a time, since opportunities were not equal, let's assume they are now, you would more oftenly see female nurse, male doctor. So naturally, if that's what you learn off of, you will be making such silly assumptions, right? The thing that I feel really strong about, though, is to understand and to not over-sensationalize what AI does, because bias is not an AI-specific problem. If I'm the mayor of a city and I want the average income, I want to calculate it, to motivate a meaningful city tax rate, if I go around and forget the poor people only, or the rich people only, I will make a bias calculation that then can also have societal impact. That does not make the problem of bias less, but it is really important. That's why I was so annoying, almost interrupted you, because it is really important to understand what is what, right? And what is idiosyncratic of AI, or whether this is something we should be thinking anyway across everything.
One of the other things we need to talk about is like education, right? Like how do institutions, schools teach their students, but then also how do businesses train their employees? Ira, I'm interested to understand what's going on at T-Row. Like, first of all, at a top line, is T-Row making more money because you're using AI? And how are you implementing it? How are you training your traders to do that, if so?
No comment. That said, again, the way I'm thinking about, and again, generative AI is the one that has brought us here, right? Even though with generative AI, now we're talking more and more about AI as a field more generally. Again, the education is to understand what these tools are good for. So you have a language model. It's called language for a reason, right? It understands language, so it can help me consume a lot of content faster. It can help me create a lot of content faster. So going back to your question, it's not that much about the money or non-money. It's about empowering kind of people so that they can probably focus on higher level operations, as we call it, like cognitive processes, as opposed to, all this work that sometimes has to happen. And most importantly, though, it's not only about doing it faster, but also better. I think I alluded to that earlier. I won't be able to read 100 papers if I want to learn about something, period. I know that. I may read 10. So now not only can I read the 10, but I can probably read all 100 of them, so both faster and better. Going back to your original question, again, that's how we see especially functionality around LLMs, content creation, faster content creation and content consumption. Training is always part, as we said. The educated user is the best risk management, and yeah, we continuously staying up to date, understanding how the field evolves.
To the rest of the panel, how should we best educate?
So I should say that AWS has made a massive investment in offering free AI education courses and tools, but I also just want to highlight that when I first started in this role, I presented to a bunch of CIOs from some of the largest school districts in the country, and at that time, back last year, 60% of the school districts had banned the use of generative AI at school. We've gone beyond that, and so I do want to highlight for the public sector folks here that it's important for constituents, students, individuals to engage with the technology so that they are better prepared. So I do think that it is an equity issue that we engage students with using the technology, using it thoughtfully and responsibly. Understanding how the sausage is made is critically important to an educated constituent who's going to be consuming these capabilities either from private vendors or from their own public sector agencies. And so that's a really important point to pull out, that the best way to learn it is to use it and engage with it.
Sorry, I'm just laughing at that using AI in schools is banned. Of course, in school, that you shouldn't necessarily use that as a form of education. But my third grader definitely uses Alexa to do her math homework.
For sure. And I think, just one point on that, though, is we have to be careful about anthropomorphizing artificial intelligence and giving it, too much credibility, because it still is a amalgamation of our own ideas and thoughts that is put together using mathematics in a way that we don't always understand. And I worry very much that students, individuals will consistently rely on AI-generated responses without understanding that it is incredibly flawed.
100%, actually. I think, on the topic of how do we make sure that we are that educated consumer so that when we're using it, we have the right level of scrutiny to say, is this answer right? And, I use ChatGPT often for everyday work, professional work, and personal, and even putting in math problems. Sometimes it is completely wrong. And if I didn't already know math, I wouldn't otherwise know. And so it does require, I think, to have some base knowledge and at least at a minimum, the willingness to ask, is this correct? Ideally, the people who, like myself and my team, who are creating new AI tools, what we should also be thinking about is the transparency of it, meaning showing our end user all the signs of how did we arrive at this answer. And that's actually explainable. AI is a really big area that is creating a lot of research and a lot of output right now, because it's also hard to say, we want to get out of that black box model where it's hidden behind a black box to understand how it went from this input to this output. So ideally, we want to be as transparent as possible and say, when we put in these inputs, for example, in our case, when we put in pictures of throats that look like XYZ, small tonsils, not red, no pus, this is how we arrived at the answer, that it's not likely to be strep throat. To explain that to the end user, I think the onus is on the technologists. And until we are at that point of full transparency, I think there's, I encourage consumers to also ask that question of try to understand what inputs did they use to train this model? Do those inputs from that training data set, is that similar to me? Am I the right age that they trained this with? Am I the right sex, race, and so on? And having that level of scrutiny, I think, as consumers is really important right now.
So education to me, like, I think everyone has to have two levels of understanding. One is conceptual, right? How does it work? How does it do what it's do? And frankly, it's not very hard to get a good level of conceptual understanding on data-driven AI. And so it should make sense to you, right? So if you say, look, can I ask ChatGPT to give me a PowerPoint presentation about, anything about the Middle East conflict, for example, right? And ask yourself, how would it do it, right? Is it even possible for a tool to do this? And then think about, what kind of data it has access to, and if you had access to that data, would you be able to put together a presentation? And therefore, maybe it can also do this, right? And so that level of conceptual understanding now, recently, there are two very big things that have happened in generative AI. The way in which you can go from data to new data has been transformed by a technology called transformers, which is very amazing, right? In terms of how, if you give it massive amounts of data, it can create new data that looks like the old data. Now, that's not magic, but the fact that you can do it now opens your eyes on, wow, what all can it do? The other underlying thing that's very important is this technology called reinforcement learning, where you can give it rewards, and the AI tool learns how to use rewards to know how to get better, to learn and improve on its own. And games, that's how it learns to play games so well. And today, for instance, any computer game, right? If anybody in this audience, beats a computer game, it's only because the computer let you beat it, right? And frankly, that is the truth, right? That's the absolute truth. And please, go home with a little more awareness of your real capabilities as opposed to the computer. So certain tasks, these things are phenomenal, right? You can make it very good with these reward mechanisms. But the real world is not about games, right? There are a lot more complexities, and that's where these things start breaking down, and the human element. So I think for people to get this level of understanding is very important in any profession. And I think that will change the way you understand the good, the bad, and the ugly of AI, right? So there are many things about what AI can do. There are many things which are actually potentially dangerous. And then there are things which are really ugly that AI can also do. And we can spend a long time talking about the good, the bad, and the ugly, but that's not the purpose of this panel.
So let's think of our audience, right? This is a question to everyone, right? What is something our audience could take away and do, at work, in their businesses, in their personal lives, to incorporate AI in a way that can be really useful and productive? For me, AI is a wonderful blind spot detector, right? I got grade feedback the first time I wrote a job post before I sent it to my boss, right? Things like that. How can our listeners, our audience, be using this better in their lives?
Well, I'm going to talk to this group right here. Are you students? Raise your hand. Welcome. I just want to say that tell your teachers to cover their ears. I had a D in math most of my life. I have a history major, and I taught middle school in the Bronx. And now I run strategy for AWS for artificial intelligence in their public sector. Stay curious. This technology is at its infancy. It is, if you continue to learn, if you're curious about it, I think there's a huge, huge opportunity for everyone. And you don't have to be a deep, deep scientist, no offense, to be engaged in this work. And
None taken.
I want you to just maintain your curiosity about the capabilities of it. It's going to grow, it's going to expand, it's going to change your lives, and you can all have something to do with it if you just stay curious and stay engaged. Read about it, learn about it. I'm so happy you're here, so just wanted to say that.
I believe that AI is giving the superpowers of being a physician to everyday people. So, how we all Dr. Google ourselves, like, oh no, I have a scratch, it must be cancer. what I see generative AI, specifically large language models, and also what we're creating with computer vision through my company, we're giving the superpowers of clinical decision making and helping narrow down what could this be, but with even more capability. And so I see this as giving all of us the superpowers of what physicians probably go to school for way too long for. And so with that, I also encourage you to maintain that scrutiny, because it can be wrong, and it requires you to ask that question, should I trust it or not?
Yeah, I will echo everything. I think what I would like to leave you with is that neither extreme techno-optimism nor techno-pessimism can be right. Something in between. What do I mean by that? Probably, no, we will continue needing jobs, and probably, yes, we will be able to get jobs. So going back to what my fellow panelists said, it is great, helpful, it is a tool. It can be wrong, same as humans. And having this realistic kind of approach that it is something that can help you do certain things, I think it's kind of healthy, right? As opposed to, again, either being afraid of it, it's not that powerful, or thinking that it's always correct, copy-paste directly. So neither nor, as is often the case in life, it's something in between.
We needed a question, so just real quick, the one tip you'd give the audience.
About?
Just, how could they use AI in their lives, just very quickly before we get to questions.
I think the software that most people use on their phones now are going to get very useful, right? So you will see email reminders saying, hey, these 5 emails you haven't responded to, there's something important going on. There's AI behind the scenes at Microsoft Outlook and Gmail that's making this happen. That automatically helps your life. There are going to be so many ways to save time in your daily lives that will come through your Android, Apple, email ecosystems. Maps will automatically alert you of things. So there are things that the standard same apps that we're using right now are going to make life easier for us and save time. That's already happening, and that's a big win. Students and others, I'd say, use ChatGPT to do things like generate cover letters, fine-tune your resume. Use it as a friend to improve what you do, but always question the output and be careful about not plagiarizing, because that tends to copy sometimes from other people.
Be careful copy and pasting, that's for sure. Zuri, I believe we have some questions from the audience.
Yes, I do. There are plenty here, and they could be generously grouped into a couple of buckets. Concern and deep concern. Let's start with deep concern. The frontier AI labs like Microsoft OpenAI, Google DeepMind openly admit that this technology is an existential threat to all life on Earth. They don't know how to control their tech, they say. They do not understand how their tech works, they say. How is the existential risk from AI not the most important issue ever?
I'll take this one. So they are in the business of sensationalizing a few things to begin with, right? So these are powerful models, very powerful models. But they are models. They don't wake up one morning and decide to be biased. As we said, we decided to use whatever data we used, or OpenAI, et cetera, and now naturally it will exhibit biased behavior. It's not a choice. It's not a free agent with free will. It's not an agent to begin with. When and if we actually start approaching AGI, artificial general intelligence, you're correct. That's going to be like, hey, what's happening here? But for better or worse, we are nowhere close. A conversation I had with Balaji earlier, and again, it comes, after a few years of being a physicist, it becomes a feeling, right? That there is no possibility of something really intelligent coming out from something so brutally built. Like these amazing engineering feats are extremely expensive, extremely complicated, trillions of parameters. Nothing efficient such as real intelligence will come from that. It is useful, and that's where it stops. As experts on the field, we believe that there is symbolic AI that needs to be combined with the current paradigm to actually lead to what you're saying.
I would slightly disagree, just in terms of, I was saying this even in our prep, technology, when you have really powerful technology, it gets used very quickly by entities that can get a high return on investment, right? So if you can save lives, you'll find that quickly people figure out how to save lives. If you can make money, you'll find that people quickly figure out how to make money. That's why Wall Street has been embracing AI for 40 years, right? Because there's money-making opportunities there. But at the same time, unfortunately, return on investment defined by the bad guys is if you can make it do havoc, you get great return on investment. And my experience has always been that great technology sometimes has been used better by the bad guys than the good guys. And history has taught us that time and time again, with these exceptions, with these life-saving exceptions and return on investment exceptions on the business side. So we should not be surprised when we find that AI can be used to do really bad things. And frankly, today's AI, for instance, a simple thing, right? Being able to automatically generate deep fakes and send threatening messages to you. We've already seen this happen, right? People have been, there's a deep fake that has talked to a person like their daughter saying, I'm kidnapped, give me money. This has happened months ago, right? And we shouldn't be surprised because bad actors will use this, and we have to figure out how to build good defenses to it, right? There was a California bill recently that got vetoed by the governor that would have made the tech companies even more responsible for watching out for these types of things. So there is a movement afoot where academics and others are really, pressing the alarm button a bit, saying we need regulation that can look out for the harms and prevent it. And I do think we need that, and it's
Well, Mary,
Balaji, I need we don't disagree. We are talking about existential. Nobody said, that's what I said, if we use it wrong, what I want to make sure that everybody understands is that it's not waking up in the middle of the night and making its own things. It's us who choose to do that. As we discussed, a knife can be used to cut an apple or kill someone. You're not going to call that existential to the knife if I decide to use it the wrong way. That's all I'm saying.
Mary, does AWS have enough servers and enough power to create Skynet?
Next question.
All right, I've got a few educators here who have some questions, and I'll start with the one that I've got first, which is, as an educator in research, I think a lot about AI and its opportunities, but I am concerned about the impact on students and their ability to express themselves and my ability to evaluate them. How should researchers and educators empower students with these tools? And I'll just throw this in here as a sort of secondary question. Should AI tools be banned in schools?
I'll take that. No, they shouldn't be banned. I don't think you're going to be able to prevent them from being banned. They're already being deployed through educational technology providers anyway. I do want to highlight, I do think we think of artificial intelligence as the robot overlord. I will say, in my world, which is in education in the US, we are seeing extraordinary use cases that actually enhance equity, agency, and access to learning and institutions. So what we're seeing is the ability for a student to access notes and information from their class anytime they want on their phone, in their own language, in their own learning style, so that they are able to be more successful. We're working with Highline College out on the West Coast to, they use an artificial intelligence capability to expedite the financial aid application process and actually track their financial aid package using essentially sort of an Amazon package tracking, which allows students to have that confidence to be able to register for courseware depending on where they're knowing that their financial aid is in process. We can think of the same use cases in the public sector around benefits applications, et cetera. So I think there is tremendous opportunity to break down those opaque institutional processes with artificial intelligence. On the learning side, I think there's a lot of opportunity to enhance how we hyper-personalize content for students and how they engage with it. Teachers will be faced with the challenge of assessing learning? What are durable assessments that you could put in place that maybe supervised assessments? And rethinking how you use in-classroom time, not to sort of spray and pray and lecture, but really authentically understand where students are, because they can access knowledge on their own time and in their own way outside of that space.
Maybe we could just do a quick show of hands. Do you or would you let your students use AI? I let my students use AI.
Yes. Well, I'm going to, one other sometimes the homework and the assessments that come home are so banal that AI is great for it because they're not thoughtful enough, they're not personalized enough. And I sometimes say if your students can get through your class using generative AI, then there's something wrong with your assessment practices. So we need to think a little differently about how we engage students in that classroom setting and how we elicit information from them. So sorry, teachers, again.
Yeah, things like compare 18th century Europe history with 18th century Asia. I mean, this is a question that you would beg to ask ChatGPT, right? Then students writing the essay. So I think on the education side, we have to rethink assessment and say that, look, this is a great tool, but at the same time, there might be some classes like critical thinking. If we want somebody to generate an entire argument from scratch, we do want them to generate it from scratch. So there I don't want them to use ChatGPT, get an argument and pretend that they came up, because the goal is to teach critical thinking, right? So there are some cases where I would want them to come up, but the thing is, I cannot assume that at home they don't do this, so I need a different way of assessing that.
It's almost like you have to air gap your students now. You have to keep the computers away and set them and then ask them questions. It's the only way you can really know what's going on in there.
One way to accomplish everything we've talking about is say, here's your assignment on, the history of World War II. Bring in the generative AI assignment. Now we're going to critique it. We're going to write it differently. We're going to look at it from our own personal lens. And I think that is what we need to be thinking about. It is here. It's a co-creator of learning. We need to put our own thought process on it.
And aggregation of facts doesn't necessarily mean learning, right? So, okay, you access facts differently. There's still something to be discussed, right, around all these facts.